All right. Good evening. I tend to talk softly, so wave your arm if you can't hear me. I'm Carla Wikoff with the Farm Service Agency. I work in the conservation, price support, and emergency conservation program area in the state office. So work with all the county offices to help implement those programs. I want to provide you with my sincere concern for you and working through this process, and we hope that what the information that we're providing you will help you in the recovery process. So ECP, Emergency Conservation Program, it's a program that we implement in cases where there's been a natural disaster and ag producers need assistance in order to bring their land back into pre-disaster condition. One of the things that's required with that is that the work that's done on that land to do that recovery, we're required to follow NRCS standards and specs in order to be able to cost share with producers on the payments. So just to give you a little background to how ECP works, it's a program that's not active continually. It just happens when there is some type of natural disaster in the area. So just give you a little background of how that process works, because it does take a little bit to get up and get rolling. The county committees and the county emergency boards, they make an overall initial assessment of the damage to start with. And then the county executive director completes what we call a loss assessment report. Then the county committee makes a determination to see if ECP is warranted based on the needs of the community. And that can be one person in the community that needs that, they can implement that ECP. Once they have determined that the ECP is warranted, then the county committee sends all the documentation and information to the state office. That goes on to the national office, and they're the ones that make the final determination of implementing the program. So once the national program manager makes the decision, approves us to implement ECP in a county, then the county committee sets up a sign-up period. And counties then will begin informing and educating producers on how this program works and what they need in order to get cost share through this program. So just to let you know at this point, we have received your county offices, service centers have already gone to work to pull this request together. We've already received requests from Rooks, Russell, Osborne, Ellis, Graham, Trigo, and Wichita County, which is a little farther away from you guys. So they have done their part at this point to start working on this program. We are waiting on the national office to determine, to give their approval for us to implement the program. So that's where we're at with that right now. One thing to note in here is before a ECP application is approved, there is no guarantee of payment. So we have to go through the whole process in order for the payments to be funded and be able to do that. One of the things that they have to look at before that approval is done is going through the environmental and cultural resource review prior to approval. So person eligibility. So any person that has any type of event, natural disaster event, it's determined on an individual basis when the producer comes in and makes their application, and they must not be able to install or repair that without assistance or without it causing a financial hardship to the producer. You do have to be an ag producer that contributes to the cost of the practice and you have to have an interest in the farm, such as being an owner, tenant, land lord, or sharecropper. So land eligibility is land that's physically located in a county that's been approved for ECP. It's privately owned and normally used for farming. Can be a grazing, commercial livestock operation, or producing ag commodities, or commercially producing orchards or groves. Ineligible ground would be any federal, state owned or controlled land, or any losses due to being located in a greenhouse, a hoop house, or a high tunnel structure, or any devoted trees for timber production. They do not fall within this, eligible for this program. So some of the ECP practices that we implement are replacing and restoring permanent fences, restoring conservation structures and other installations, field windbreaks, and farmstead shelter belts. So permanent fences, just a couple of highlights there. It would apply on farmland where permanent fences are used for ag purposes and they were destroyed or seriously damaged by the approved disaster. Materials and design must restore the fence to a similar type and function that existed before the natural disaster, and the practice had to be functioning prior to the disaster. Fence replacement and restoration must conform to current NRCS standards and specs. So as Todd said, we keep repeating ourselves through some of these things. So that's one of the requirements for getting cost share from us, is meeting the NRCS standards and specs. These practices do have lifespans, so they want you to maintain those practices that they're cost sharing with you on. And just an example would be for fencing, it's a 20-year time period that's a lifespan for that practice that it'd have to be maintained. So for permanent fences, if you're restoring that, then cost share would be authorized for fence to return the land to productive ag use, any livestock inclusion, wildlife exclusion to protect a crop, cross fences, boundary fences, cattle gates, and any solar or wind-based power sources if it is determined to be less costly than electric fence. So with the last farm bill, they added an extra option under the fencing cost share, where you can request a cost share advance payment to help pay for any expenditures that you need for that fencing ahead of time. At the time you make your application, when you go to the service center, you need to make that request at that time. And you can request 25% of the total cost share available for that fencing. And one of the requirements with receiving that advance payment is that you use that money for your expenditures within 60 days. You have to provide a receipt to the county office to show that you've spent that money, that you've gotten that 25%. So that's really important on there, is that advance that you're taking, you need to spend that within 60 days of the receipt of the advance. So when you receive that money. So another option is restoring conservation structures. It's those used for ag purposes, and they must be built to the NRCS standards and specs. Cost share components in this area would be solar units for livestock damaged by wildfire, livestock water facilities when damaged by wildfire, or permanent cover when needed in conjunction with eligible structures used to prevent critical erosion. Another option under ECP is for field windbreaks and farmstead shelter belts. So once again, if they're destroyed or seriously damaged by the fire, within the field windbreak and farmstead shelter belt program includes any debris removal, tree purchase, planting, weed control. For this, it is a 15-year lifespan that you're required to maintain that. And once again, it must be built and restored at NRCS standards and specs. So what I need to do to make an application, visit your service center that maintains your farm records and complete the FSA 848 form, which is a cost share request. We did provide that in your packet just as an example, so you can see the information that the service center is going to be asking you to fill out on that form and sign to make a request. You do need to include all producers that might be sharing in the cost of the practice. They need to be included on that application. And it always helps to have photos and any record of the damage that you have that will help through that application process. There are eligibility forms that you have to fill out with ECP. The AD 1026, if you're already a producer in a county and you're already getting payments from there, you've already probably filled out these forms. There's also the 902 and the 901, if applicable, that would be included in that requirement for getting the payments on this program. There's also the CCC 860. Todd mentioned it just a little bit. It's a form that's used for socially disadvantaged, limited resource, beginning and veteran farmer or rancher certification. So if that applies in that situation, one of the reasons for that within this cost share program is that instead of it being a 75% cost share as it normally is for ECP, you would get 90% of your cost share on that if you have an approved CCC 860 form. If that's applicable to you, then be sure and take advantage of that. So we go through the process, we approve the application, you do the work out there, and then you have to, once that's complete, you have to report the performance of the practice. This is another page of the FSA 848. The service center will provide that information to you so that you can complete that. And that has to be done before a practice expiration date. You also have to provide your documentation of what your costs were for completing the fence replacement. And those are invoices, canceled checks, paid receipts. That documentation must show the ECP applicants paid for the cost of the practice before they receive that cost share. It's also important to note that all participants that shared in the cost of the practice are included on those invoices. So if you're sharing with if owners and operators are sharing on the costs of the fence or however that share might be, their names need to be on that documentation that you're providing. The payment limitation has been moved up to $500,000 for ECP payments. So that's the maximum payment each person or any entity can receive in cost share payments. So just a list there of the documentation if you're providing your own labor and your own equipment for the fencing. Things that you need to provide are listed there that have to be provided on your documentation when you provide that. An on-site visit will be performed once the completion of the practice is done, and once again must meet the NRCS standards and specs of that practice before we can pay cost share. Payments, as I mentioned before, are paid on 75% of a rate. They have changed this procedure from several years ago when we implemented, we've implemented ECP since then, but not on a wide range like we're doing now. But they are now using what they call payment scenarios. And so it's just a flat rate that you're paid. So there's a rate we pay by foot on fencing, and there's a rate that's set for that, and then you get 75% of that rate. You do still have to provide all your documentation before you can get paid, but that documentation doesn't make a difference in what you're actually paid in the end. It's based on this set flat rate for those payments. And as I said before, if you've completed a CCC 860, then your cost share rate will be at the 90% level instead of 75%. There is a stipulation within ECP that we cannot pay, cost share payment can't exceed 50% of the ag market value of the affected land. So that's that's one of the limitations with ECP. Your county committee set that ag market value, and we can't pay you cost share over 50% of that. That's one of the limitations. So as I said before, the limitation's 500,000. It's done based on direct attribution. So that is per person per disaster event. As always, subject to eligibility and availability of funds. And the last statement on there on the minimum qualifying restoration is that they do not approve cost share requests for less than $1,000 per participant, unless you're a limited resource producer, which is that 860 form. Then it would be anything 250 or below, we wouldn't cost share. This is just some information included in your packet to show what the definition of each one of those items are for the CCC 860 form for limited resource producers, socially disadvantaged producers, and beginning farmers. This is just a quick example of how we would pay cost share for ECP. If we had a husband and wife joint venture, they own and operate 500 acres of grass, 4 miles of the fence was destroyed by fire, 4 miles were completed, and all the documentation was provided to the county office. So our computation would be based on that cost share rate. This is a real rate, $2.14 a foot. It's the 2021 rate that they had set. And that's taken times that 75%. So it'd be $1.61 a foot. So 4 miles would be a cost share of $34,003. And then that would be divided 50-50 between the husband and wife. Once again, just a reminder that both the husband and wife's names have to be on the application and on the cost documentation in order to get that cost share. Another item that I provided in the packet, besides it's an 848 form, which is the application request form that you would fill out in the county office. They'll help you with the service center. They'll help you fill that out. And then I also provided a listing of information just to add to the approval of the ECP application. And I'm not going to read all of that to you. It's just to help you. It's in your packet and you have that information there to help you with the application process.